Good morning, everyone. Chodesh Tov, Good Chodesh. We are now up to Perek Aleph, Mishnah Vav, Chapter 1, Mishnah 6. Continuing again with the discussion of what is considered Gemar Malacha, what is the completion of processing different types of produce, to say that now there is absolutely no eating from it until Trimas and Maestris are separated. Next examples are HaPered. Pered means dried pomegranate seeds. Vatzimukin, raisins, dried grapes. Vacharuvin, dried carobs. Once they are dried, Mishayam et Arema. Once you make a pile of them, that is when their processing is done. Habetzalim, we're talking about onions. Mishayafakel. That means once you peel off the rotten layers. Vim Einafakel, if you're not planning on removing the rotten layers, Mishayam et Arema, once you go ahead and make a pile of them. Hatavua, when it comes to grain, and grain refers to the 5 grains of wheat, barley, oats, rye, and spelt. That is Mishe Yimareach. That is when the pile is smoothed down. So just to review something we mentioned before, when it comes to grains, the processing is that after it's harvested, the grain is brought to a threshing floor, which is in the field, and they use animals to break off the what's it called? To separate the grain from the chaff that separates them. After that, they're winnowed to remove the chaff from the grain itself. The grain is then heaped into a pile. Then the pile, after the pile is complete, the pile is then smoothed down on all sides in order to show that this is complete, it's done, it's ready to be removed. When you hit that point of Mishimareach, when it's piled up and smoothed down, that is when we have hit the stage of complete processing. And if, let's say, he's not going to be smoothing anything down, once he makes the pile, that's the completion of its processing. Hakitnius. Now, kitnius is what we translate as legumes. And legumes in halacha, in Jewish law, is the name of a category of vegetables that includes all plants besides grain, whose edible parts are their seeds. For example, beans and peas. Where the edible thing is where the seed is the edible part, that's a legume if it's not a grain. Grains fit the same category, but it's not the same thing. If it's the 5 grains, it's a grain. Then you run into excuse me, and then you get into legumes, where other plants where the seed itself is the edible part, and we say by legumes, mishayichbar. Mishayichbar means once you sift them through, because legumes are not harvested and pulled out of the ground, and therefore dirt always gets mixed in. So you always need to sift them from the dirt. So therefore, the Mishnah says, Hakitnius, when we're dealing with legumes, Mishayichbar, the processing is complete when you sift them. If you have no plans on sifting them, once they are piled up, you make a pile out of them, that is when the processing is complete. Now, getting back to what we just said before, or any time that we've been mentioning, meruach, this idea that when it's piled up and smoothed down, that's its completion of processing. The Mishnah tells us, even though a person may have smoothed the pile down, he can still take from the ones that are not completely threshed. Sorry, I said mikutayim. Menhakutayim. Kutayim means the grains or the ears that are not. From the ears that are not completely threshed. Okay, in the pile, right? In this pile, the way I understand it is that you may have piled things up and you smoothed it out. But within the pile itself, it can still have ears of grain that are not completely threshed. You could have uminat stadim, or let's say you didn't smooth down all the sides, you only smoothed down the top. So you have the sides that weren't smoothed down. Then you have grain that's still mixed with the straw, wasn't properly winnowed. In all those cases, the Mishnah says You can take from any of these three things we just mentioned, meaning even though the main body of the pile has been processed, and therefore those parts you cannot snack from, the other parts of the pile that have not been completely processed, either because they haven't been winnowed properly, or because they haven't been smoothed down, those parts, or because they haven't even been threshed properly, there will be within the pile type ears of grain that are like that. Those you can still snack from. They're not processed. So even though the main body of the pile is processed, the grains, the ears of grain that are not processed, you can still snack from until there's some kind of point that they are completely processed. I'm not sure what that point would be. We'll actually be bringing it into the house at that point if that's where it's going, or bringing it to the marketplace as we mentioned yesterday. But this point of the completion of processing that we mentioned yesterday, the Chachamim said, at this point already you can't snack from it, only it's not going to apply to the parts of the pile that have not been completely processed. Okay. Mitzvah chafei mitzvahs lo yisaseh shlo yasef haperes sheyotzei ha'ilim b'shviyas k'derech she'oiseh b'chol shana. A person, the prohibition against gathering fruits that come out of a tree during the Shemitah year, to gather them in the way that you typically gather them all year or any other year. Shenema, as the pasuk states, and the grapes of your nizirech, of your untended vine, lo yisiftzar, you shall not gather. Pirish, what does it mean you shall not gather? It doesn't mean not to gather it at all. It means lo yisiftzar k'derech ha'kotzrim, you cannot gather in the way that the harvesters typically do. So too, you can't go gathering them for the purposes of working on the tree. What does a person do? If we're dealing with figs that grew during the Shemitah year, you do not cut them off with what they transfer here as a regular cutting tool. But you could take a sharp knife and cut them down for drying. Okay, that's what it means. They used to cut these things with a regular tool to dry them. And during the Shemitah year, you can't use that regular cutting tool to dry them, but rather you dry them with a sharp knife. Meaning you cut them down to dry them with a very sharp knife. And if you're going to be pressing grapes, no pressing them in a wine press. You have to press them in a trough. So too when we're dealing with other things. Whatever you can do to do it in an unusual way, to change from the regular way, that's what you should do. For the purpose of showing that it is really ownerless, it's not yours. In order to show that it's not really yours, I mean, you're taking it, you're going to be eating it, but since it starts off hefker, it starts off ownerless, the way we show that is that when we gather it, when we pick it, we don't do it, and we don't pick it and treat it in the way that we usually do. Have a wonderful day, and again, Chodesh Tov, a good Chodesh.